This is No One Teaches You This, a podcast for tech leaders who've had to figure things out as they go. No one's taught them what to do, but hopefully them sharing their story will help you along the way. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Adam. Good to be here.
No problem at all. Do you want to start by just giving us a quick introduction to you and then tell us about your chosen topic and why?
Yeah. So I'm Daniel Tallentire. I'm a software engineering manager, business called Citation Group. I have been in software engineering and related topics for about 20 years now. So I started off as a tech support person working in a small business, and just went up through the ropes really through there. I moved into development, did some management, managed a few teams, and then we grew the teams and grew the business. And just over time, took on more roles and responsibilities, and then ending up as a tech director in that small business. And then since then, I've worked in a few different businesses as an engineering manager. And what I really most care about is helping engineers to grow. So what I really focus on when I'm as an engineering manager, when I'm operating in my role, is how can I get other people to do as much as possible to support themselves and to be independent of any oversight and any need for really specific directions. So I don't want to be that really hands-on person who's in everybody's face all the time, giving them tasks. It's what do we need to do as a business and how can we get there? But each person in that engineering team should be able to take the lead from what needs to be done and where the value is and move that forward. So that's really my philosophy that underpins a lot of the ways that I work and the things that I do. So in going back to sort of a bit of what I do now as an engineering manager, it's quite a broad role at Citation Group. Citation Group is a private equity backed business in the HR, health and safety and certification space. So with being private equity backed, we buy up smaller businesses and bring them in and combine them to make a better product for our clients and customers. A lot of that is about finding these acquisitions and integrating them. So I look after 4 different businesses that have been acquired over the last 4 years into Citation Group. And those engineering teams are still largely independent of the group and they act on their own products and they still work separately. So they work in different tech stacks, they work with different management teams and they have their own individual roadmap, but that also gets merged into a larger group roadmap where we're trying to all move in the same direction of having one best product in each area and being able to sell all those products across to our entire customer base. So it's a very broad role with interacting with lots of different people all the time. And one of the things that means is that I'm often very busy. I've often got loads of things coming in my calendar and often it feels like we're getting a little bit overwhelmed. And that feeds back quite a lot to me around conversations that I've had over my career with my direct reports and engineers who've worked for me, that people say I'm bad at time management. And that's really the topic that I want to talk about today is those things that make us feel that we're bad at managing our own time, that where we feel like we've got a weakness in that area, and then things that you can do to help support yourself and also maybe to recognize what the underlying problem is. Because it's a very broad thing that people say. It's like a feeling that causes people to say that very often. I've had lots of one-to-ones where people have said, oh, my goal is to be better at time management or task management. And a lot of the time it's not the act of scheduling or planning the tasks and doing them that they've got a problem with. It's not a calendar issue. It's not about slotting things in. It's about understanding the value of the things that we need to work on instead and picking the right things to work on rather than working on everything all at once.
Yeah, it's I think even if you're in leadership or not, time management's something everyone struggles with. Like I know I do massively. Yeah. You said there about understanding the value of the things you work on. What do you mean by that?
I think the reason you've got to understand the value of the things you work on is that you need to aggressively prioritize what you do work on. Your time is always limited. It's always your most valuable resource that you have because it's the only thing that really you've got is how much time you apply your knowledge of your existing experience, your learning capability, and all of those things. You apply that to your time to get results. And if you are spending loads of time and getting something that is not valuable to you, not valuable to a customer, not valuable to your colleagues, then that time is less useful. You've extracted less value from your time than you could have done. And so a lot of that equation is about maximizing the value. So therefore evaluating the value of the tasks that are in front of you. And there's lots of different tools and different ways that you can do that. And it depends on the situation that you're in. So if you work for a small business or you're a small business owner, that equation and the way that you look at that value will be very different than if you work for a big enterprise business and you're looking at a stream of tasks that you've got to apply yourself to, maybe a Jira board, or there's the next task that's been said, or this is the thing that you've got to work on next to deliver. But still, there's different ways you can apply yourself to that and different ways that you can get more value from your time.
Yeah, you mentioned before as well, it's not usually a calendar issue, it's a prioritization issue. So understand the value and then prioritizing which tasks should go when or when you should do them.
Yeah.
How the hell do you untangle that mess and get to that point where you're really clear on, okay, I know what my value is for this one and this is at the top of the list? That's really difficult.
Yes.
To process that in your mind.
Yes. And I think the human mind isn't really meant for handling loads and loads of tasks all at the same time. So if you try and internalize all of that and say, I'm going to hold all these different things about, things for customers, things for people that I'm working with, your brain doesn't evaluate them in a way that is the same as what a business evaluation would take. It would prefer doing something for somebody you like rather than doing something that's going to drive your business forward, or it would prefer that you get to work on a project with a team that you want to work with rather than working on the project that might drive your career forward. So looking at the value of those things is something you've got to create a methodology that works for you. There's lots of different ways of doing that, and it also depends a little bit about what you're trying to achieve as to what sort of methodology you approach. Something like an Eisenhower matrix where you're looking at urgency and importance of different tasks and you're plotting those tasks that you have to do on that urgency versus importance scale, and then doing the things that are in the urgent plus important in quadrant first and planning to attack those first. It is one approach that works, especially if there's a lot of smaller tasks that it's difficult to see what the most important ones are, because it's a very simple prioritization matrix that you can do very, very quickly. So if you've got 60 or 100 tasks, you can still blast through 20 of those in half an hour and give them a plus minus, and then do the same. And you've organized your next 2 weeks worth of work into understanding what the most important thing is, and spending that hour or so of time will mean that you get more value in the future. So sometimes the next most important thing for you to do is actually to stop and not continue on that treadmill of work, but to think about the work that you're doing. And I think that's especially relevant to startups and small business owners as well, because it's really easy to get into that treadmill of, there's always some more work that I need to do, and not spend the time thinking about, but is this work strategically the right work that I need to do to drive my business forward?
Yeah. Okay. I want to come back to that in a second, but you mentioned the Eisenhower approach there. So if somebody's not heard of that, you sort of describe some quadrants there. Plain English, what would that be?
So you have 4 quadrants. There's a horizontal line and a vertical line that go across to divide the page into 4. And for each task, you assign a urgency and an importance to it. And if something is urgent, it goes, this is where I'm going to visually, we will share it in the notes if I've got it the wrong way around. If it's urgent, it appears in the top, and if it's important, it appears on the right. So you have urgent and important, which appears in the top right quadrant. You have urgent and not important. Well, if something's urgent but not important, why'd you do it? You don't need to do it. You get rid of it. If something's important but not urgent, then it's something that's going to go onto your task backlog to be approached. You don't want to be sitting in that urgent and important area. That's not the best place for you to be, because that's saying that your work is actually being forced onto you. You're having to firefight. That's to pick up jobs. Whereas what you should be doing is spending more time strategically in the important but not urgent quadrant is the best place where you can extract value from your time.
Okay. Okay, I'll come back to that again in a bit. So you spoke about there, the best thing sometimes to do is to stop and think about what you do. Now, I know when I try and do that, I'm the sort of person who sometimes sees my value in delivering stuff. So it's like, right, I've got to be constantly delivering stuff. I'm the person who gets stuff done. And then if there's a period of time where I do stop and think, sometimes there's a feeling of guilt around that. And it's like, well, I feel like I should be delivering something rather than stopping to think. Am I the only one feeling like that?
Definitely not. No, that is a really common feeling that people have, and that feeling of worry that if you stop, you're going to lose momentum. And I think that my messaging on that is that there's no point having a lot of momentum if you're driving into a wall. You're better off applying the brakes before you get there and turning the vehicle. I think but it is a feeling that you have to work to combat. And I think the best way to do that for somebody like you is to look at the evidence of the impacts that it has. So take it as something that you can practice, and then look at how that has made you more successful over a period of 6 weeks. And then you can see the numbers. It will be visible to you that you've got more valuable work done in the time. When you look back on each week and you recap, it will be more aligned to what your plans and objectives were, because you spent that time thinking about it and spent the time thinking about what you're going to do, but also more importantly, what you're not going to do.
What do you mean by not going to do? What do you do with that stuff?
You just chuck it in the bin.
Okay.
There's a real big desire to do everything.
Yeah.
And I think that occurs to everybody. It's really hard to say no to either people or to work. And we all know, most of us know that we do need to do that otherwise we're going to end up burning ourselves out. We're going to work too hard. Our family lives are going to suffer. Our work is going to reduce in quality as we try and increase the throughput that we put through. We all know that we need breaks. We're humans. But it is very, very hard sometimes to say no to clients or to your boss. And you've got to figure out the right way of saying no in those circumstances that helps you to say no and also makes you not sound like you're being an arsehole.
Yeah.
Because it can come across like that. If someone's offering you some work and you say, look, I can't do it at the moment. I haven't got the time. You've got to make sure that you don't know, they're going to go to somebody else. You're going to lose the business. And that sort of threat against you makes you feel like you've got to take it on, even though when you know it's detrimental. So part of it, so we've gone a little bit around and about there. So the time spent stop and thinking, you need to recognize that is valuable time. And I think that's it sort of almost fits into the same sort of equation. It's coming back to how can I extract that maximum value from my time? Well, I spend that, I do that by planning. I do that by planning how I'm going to respond to some scenarios that are quite likely, and I think that's probably the right approach to take at the start of the week. And if you think about, what is it like? How is it likely that I'm going to have to say no? In what ways can extra work come my way? It's a team's request from somebody saying, "Oh, can you help me with this report?" And there's a lot of engineers who are really helpful people. They like to know their system. They like to be seen as really knowledgeable. It's great for people to think that you're a knowledgeable and helpful person, and they tend to think, "Oh, okay, I'll just put down what I'm working on, and I'll go and respond to this person." And what maybe could have been a 5-minute response maybe becomes half an hour. Maybe it wasn't quite right. The export didn't come up quite right, so it's actually 2 hours, and you've taken that time away from somewhere else. And then there's also the distraction on the rest of the workload. And by the time you've done that, it's 3:00 on a Friday afternoon, and you've not got the desire to dive back into that really big task that you were working on in a really sort of effective way. And it's lost half a day, but just because you haven't said no to a request that you didn't have the time to do. Sometimes that request comes from somebody that it's more difficult for you to say no to if they're a superior. And in that case, usually in my teams, there's a structure, there's a way that new work is supposed to get into the team. And that comes in through the product owner. And so they would be able to triage and help support the engineers in those sorts of requests. But people still try, and they're not necessarily maliciously going around, but they know they get an answer. So their work reward sense is built up around going and speaking to the engineer who maybe they've worked with for 10 years before they've come into a more structured organization, and asking that question directly without really understanding the consequences of that on the rest of the work that we're doing. And I think so being able to either do a soft no in that circumstance, which might be, oh, I can't look at that at the moment, but if you speak to the product owner, they'll get somebody to have a look at it for you when they're available, or a hard no in terms of, we haven't, that report isn't something that we can get at the moment. And it just depends a little bit on your relationship with the person who's asking, and also whether this is like a common occurrence in the team and they've been asked a lot of the time. You end up saying, well, we don't want people to directly message to ask for requests. It should go into a group channel or into a ticket, just to make it easier for everybody to prioritize the work correctly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into that saying no. Have you always been naturally quite good at saying no?
No, I've been. It took me a long time to realize that I have the amount of power to say no. It's almost like the default was to say yes and just try and fit everything in.
Should the default be no?
There's some people who would say that the default should be no. I think it depends a little bit on how you think. Maybe the default should be not yet, or why would maybe be a better answer.
Classic one in tech is it depends.
It depends. It depends a bit because it's not because what you want to do is ask a question. So if I'm the decision maker as to whether that piece of work gets done, then I want to know why the person needs it and what the urgency is. The number of requests that you just said, can I have this report? I need it for a client. Okay, when do you need the report for the client? Why do we need the report for the client? Is this because there's something at risk? Is there some information in the system we're not sharing? There's some regulatory requirement we're not meeting, so we have to export that data. There's a lot of information that could get missed in that conversation. And sometimes it's just because, the clients asked for it and we want to keep them sweet. And then I can still make a judgment around that. What's the size of the client? Okay, let's go for it. Or perhaps it's, we don't have the time to do that. It's going to cause us to miss our sprint goals. So we're not going to do that just to keep them sweet. Here's the reports of data that we already have. You can go away and make something that approximates what they're looking for, what we're trying to get, or we can add something in to the future to say, we'll set up a monthly report job for this client to extract that data for them when we hit an appropriate point, and we give them a not yet answer. But it's quite a nice not yet answer in those circumstances, because often people are asking for data because they either don't understand how something, they're trying to understand the value of something. That's usually why clients are asking for data out of a system, is that they're trying to understand why the service we're offering them is valuable, or they're trying to meet a regulatory guidance. Sometimes they're just trying to show that they're doing a good job to their boss, which is where it's the ones that you want to try and avoid. And if it depends on whether they're a decision maker or not. Especially when you're a small business, which is a lot of my background, you've got to look at these requests and try and understand how much impact that's going to have on that client's willingness to stay in a contract with you. Because as a small business, you're very vulnerable to people just going, I'm going to go and use somebody else who offers a similar service. So
there's pressure riding on that.
There's a lot of pressure riding on that. So that's why I would always ask why, and I still try and follow that approach. Even in citation group, if people are asking me for things, I'm asking why, I'm asking when do you need it for. I tend to do quite a lot of information security work, looking at what clients are checking out to see if our software is secure. So we've got to respond to questionnaires, and that information is coming in from the client in a big spreadsheet, and I answer some of it. And there's a great team who back me up and do loads of other parts of those answers. But sometimes the questions are just really weird, and you've got to dig into either, why do you need to know this piece of information? What are you actually trying to get at? Because what you're asking doesn't necessarily make sense. And you've got to really dig into, well, why do you need to know this? And when do you need to know it? So it's very similar, that approach that I'm taking now with what I did when I was in the smaller business, once I understood how to work a little bit more effectively. And looking back over the years, at one point I had 60 or 70 tasks written on Post-it notes on my office window. and the way that I manage my time was me and our head of development was like putting tasks on that board for me to look at where I needed to, if I was blocking something or someone needed an answer, or I need to speak to a client and we need to figure out what we're going to do. And some of those tasks were, strategy. Some of them were update a database. As you're in a small business, you get the whole gamut of everything, and you've got to balance that. And it's not it's difficult to align that to what you're trying to do as a business strategy when you're a small business. And the better approach is to try and remove as many of those things, to delegate more of them if you're in that position. There's a lot of people in software who are unwilling to delegate, or they don't know how to delegate properly to their direct reports, either if they're managers or their team leaders, and they're trying to hold on to too many things because they know they can answer it the best. It's like someone comes to me with a question, I know, I can answer that better than anybody. But it's not necessarily the most long-term, efficient, most valuable thing for the business. If I spend an hour on something versus someone else could spend half a day on something, in terms of the opportunity cost of me spending an hour on something, maybe not in all circumstances, but that may be worse than somebody else spending a half day working out how to do it and then doing it, rather than me having a much better starting off point. And I see that quite often with team leads who haven't been team leads very long, is that they'll try, and if they know that one of their team doesn't necessarily know how to do something, they'll often pick up the gaps themselves and do it for them.
Yeah.
Where really it's much better to teach and show them how to do it themselves and try and make people more independent. So that's getting part of that, those answers to when they're looking at tasks is, does it have to be me that does this task? If you're in an organization where there are other people, that you can hand them off to other people if possible. And sometimes their workloads are just as bad as mine. But if it's not me that has to do it and it's not somebody else that have to do it, then maybe it's even a different sort of no. It's just organizationally we cannot deliver this thing alongside our other priorities, and we have to figure out a different approach. And whoever's creating the work has to think about, maybe is there a lighter way to get the answer that I need?
Yeah. You've probably answered this question in all of that detail there. But let's say there is a leader listening to this right now and they're going, I know I'm not saying no enough. I'm just taking on everything. What would you say is the first step for them to do?
On a Monday, prepare to say no. Just have it set as your default answer when anybody asks you to do something. I mean, if it's a Teams message, start by writing no in the Teams and then thinking about, before you press send, well, is that the right answer to this request?
Yeah.
So default to no, default to can somebody else do that? Default to really thinking about the value. You've got to be careful you don't push away too much, because if you stop doing the things that people have been asking you to do and you suddenly cut them off, if it's the same sort of tasks that they've been asking you to do over a long period, and you just suddenly go, I'm not doing any of that anymore, you're going to create a vacuum. You're going to create issues for other people, and you're going to make yourself really unpopular. And that's not something you want to do as a tech leader inside a business, because you've got to work with all these other businesses, and they've probably got all these other stakeholders in the business, all these other managers, and they've probably got similar problems to you. They think you're the only person who can give them that answer, and that they need that thing. So you've got to be sensitive around when you're challenging and when you're saying no, but having that questioning mindset of to think, no, maybe not no, but why should I do this? And maybe that's the first question that you should ask yourself whenever a request comes in. Why should I do this?
Yeah.
And then if you don't know why you should do it, you can ask more questions of the person putting the request. It may be the answer is because I'm the only person who can do this. Then okay, and it needs to be done. And if you know that already, then you've got to prioritize it against the other tasks in your list. But spending that time getting yourself in the right mental space to be able to say no, because as a leader, you're expected to control your own workload, and your senior management in the business, the managing directors of the business, whoever you report to, will expect you to tell them if you have more work that is not allowing you to follow the strategic objectives of the business.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that often a lot of tech leaders miss, is that the business has the strategic objectives and you're expected to deliver to those strategic objectives. And that sometimes means not doing certain types of work, making more time to think about those strategic decisions. So you need to plan to clear some time from your calendar.
Yeah. I like that actually starting at no if somebody's going in on Monday morning, because it feels uncomfortable to say no. So you need to get comfortable with it, first of all, like saying it a few times, and whether it's because we're British or whatever it might be, it's really difficult to say no
really
to me.
difficult.
You feel rude. And it's just going to get you in that mindset. A bit of a broader question. So why is time management still an issue when we've got 1,000,001 tools that are supposed to solve it for us?
I think partly because of that thing that people think that the issue is time management, and people are very focused on then, tracking the time that I'm spending on things, controlling and updating my calendar, or managing the tasks in my list, the task management apps that we have that are brilliant at organizing a big list of tasks, but they're still only as good as the information that you put into them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think most of the time when I've spoken to people about this time management issue, it's not the granular management of time that they're talking about. Like, they're not late for work, they're not sleeping in, not missing meetings. And that's one of the things that you think about for time management. They go down and make a cup of tea and actually they're 5 minutes late for the next meeting. That's a bit of a time management issue, probably a distraction issue. I think it's just one of those things that people bundle together under a convenient crutch, because it means that if you say, I'm bad at time management, you can get away without fixing the problem.
Yeah.
You can get away without really thinking about the value of the work that you do. And that's a really hard thing to think about.
Yeah. Going back to that value thing, if you get yourself in the mindset of what value am I delivering today, and looking at all those tasks you got to deliver, if you've got to the end of the day, are you going to feel like you've delivered some value, or are you going to feel like you run around like a headless chicken? Like, starting each day with that mindset is going to help, surely.
Yeah.
Are there any tools or techniques that you've used that, if someone's listening, have helped you that might help them?
I think as a leader, the one that I use the most is the Leaders Week, which is a planning methodology that helps you figure out what you're going to spend your time on in a week. And once you've made that commitment, it's then easier to say no to other things, because you've reserved that time for tasks, for specific things. So every Monday morning, I get out a template and I'll fill it in. And on that template, it already lists my quarterly objectives that I've committed to. It lists the company quarterly objectives so that I can see what those are as well for each of the business units and for the sort of group objectives that I'm looking at. And then the list it's broken down into sections, which is essentially where I'd fill in the tasks. And there's one item on there that is one really big task that I want to do, one big important thing, and that is an 8-hour commitment. That's a more of a strategic piece. That's what I'm going to be spending most of my time on in that week. That's maybe broken up into 2 hours over 4 days, blocked out. I'm not necessarily blocking out my calendar. It might be something like doing a team reorganization, for instance, where I need to take a significant amount of time. I'm going to talk to multiple people. I'm going to get some approvals. I'm going to go through stuff. I'm going to plan how I'm going to communicate. And it's a bigger piece that I know is going to take more time to work on. And then after that 8-hour block, I've got another section, which is sort of the focus activities, which is 3 tasks which take up to 2 hours. So that's, now I'm up to 14 hours of commitment, which is quite a lot for a manager. And that's really the maximum level of like bulk commitment time that I think it's safe for me to reach. And then I've got a list of smaller tasks, which I will then schedule in for if I'm going to go through, and I've got a couple of hours blocked out for doing some of these smaller tasks. And some of them might be answering customer compliance documents that I know I've got a due deadline in this week. I tend to work to when the deadline is due.
Love a deadline. The motivation.
Yeah. Deadline always gets me going. But whatever those tasks are, they're then listed out, and I try not to put too many into the week. So maybe there's 5 or 6 tasks that I know that I need to get done. Then I will allow the rest of the time is covering off my day-to-day, week-to-week activities, one-to-ones with my team, one-to-ones with my bosses that are going on, any of the initiatives that we're running as a group. And then there's time that I know is going to get taken up by emergent tasks, because I know that in the business that I work in, that does happen quite a lot. Is because people do need information, whether there's a new acquisition on the horizon, and when it pops up, we need to have to do some technical work to really think about that, prepare for due diligence. What are the questions that we need to ask? I haven't necessarily got full control or visibility of that before my week starts, so I reserve that time for those things that I choose that I need to do. If you put yourself in this mindset and you plan what these core commitments that you've got to deliver are, every time a new task comes in, you can think about, well, which of my tasks am I going to take off?
Yeah. Okay.
And if it's a 2-hour block, well, it's replacing one of my 2-hour block tasks. If it's just a little one, well, it's replacing one of these 6 to 10 tasks that I've put in my tasks that I'm committing to delivering this week. And it's a self-commitment, not necessarily shoving this up to my bosses to say, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Some of those things might be, but at the start of the week, you make those commitments to deliver those things. And then at the end of the week, you can recap and try and understand, well, why did I deliver? What did I deliver? Did I do it well? There's a little bit of a review section on whether you felt you did well in the other aspects of leadership, collaboration, working with your team, communication in different meetings, just so you can have a little bit of a think about, are there any areas you need to work on next week when you do that end of week recap? And each task that you didn't do, you can write against why you chose not to do it, and whether that's because you ran out of time, or whether that's because, so when you ran out of time, because I valued another task higher than this task. So you can have some little categorization that you do for yourself, or because you came to look at it and you decided it wasn't needed and you did something else instead. So you can build that value discussion or that value thought process into each of those pieces as you're going through, because you're thinking about that task list. How does it align to my objectives? So you've got it on this single page where you can see your objectives and whether those are personal, you've got your personal development objectives on there as well as your business objectives, and how are these things aligning with what it is that I want to do.
I really got the personal business objectives, because usually you set them and you never look at them again until the end of the quarter and go, have we done that? I forgot that we were doing it.
Yeah.
It's happens a lot. How long does it take you to fill out that document?
Half an hour.
Half an hour.
To really think about it properly, just to make sure that I'm doing the right things.
And what was it called again?
It's called the Leaders Week.
Leaders Week.
There's quite a few templates online for it, but I'll share one on my website that I use.
Yeah, we'll put that in the notes. Yeah, that's I've spoken to somebody else about a document similar. They sent it to me to have a look at, see if it would work for me, and it was reviewing those tasks at the end of the week which you hadn't done. Yeah. They had actually assigned scores. If you hit, let's say you had 15 tasks, if you're consistently hitting 10 to 15 out of those tasks, this is working for you and you've got your priorities sorted. Between 6 and 10, for instance, it needs some refinement. And then obviously below that, you're going, well, there's an issue here that you need to look at. Did you have any scores built in, or is it just a review?
Only in your review of it, your self-scoring, how you feel that it's gone. I tend not to like numbers that look like they may be being more accurate and precise than they are. So I would prefer to say I delivered well rather than I delivered 8 out of 10. Because a lot of it's about how I feel about it. So I'm not necessarily converting those things. But if it's for some people, that metric driven approach really works and helps them to drive change in their process. I think that if you're more of a feel driven person where you're trying to see what the feeling of doing that planning and review looks like, then that wouldn't help you as much.
Yeah, that's more where I sit. And I was like, those scores it wouldn't help me. I'm much more of the feeling type. How do you have that document open all week?
No. I would look at it every morning.
Okay.
Because usually when I'm doing it, I'm also then scheduling the slots where I'm going to do the things in based on what my calendar currently looks like. So if I need to block out a couple of spots, or I'm tagging what that 8-hour thing is and looking at it and going, well, actually, I haven't got time to spend. There's not enough open places where I can put an 8-hour piece in. I can only do a 4-hour commitment on this week, just to make sure I'm setting my own expectations correctly.
Yeah. So you review it every morning and basically plan your day each morning. Go, this is what I'm doing today. Looking at my task list, right? I'm booking that in, or at least mentally noting what you're going to be doing for that day.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The reason I asked that is, again, there's so many documents out there, isn't there, that you can follow, and structures. My brain works in very, very similar to that document. Set weekly goals of things that I want to achieve. But what I'll then do is I block out my calendar for that week. What I really struggle with is then going back to a document and filling in another document every day. It's like, I feel like it's wasting too much time. I can review it daily, but I don't want to be writing, okay, what happened yesterday? This was good, this was bad.
Yeah.
I do it on a weekly basis rather than a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've done things like reflective diaries before, where you try and write a bit more. I never really got on with that as a process. It just felt very artificial to me to be doing that. But I know that some people really like that journaling approach, where you write it more as a prose form, and then potentially look at just a sentiment based view at the end. But the actual act of writing it down helps your brain to process it. So I think it is a very personal piece, and I think that's something that I've learned over the years as well, looking at different task management methodologies, is that the way that you approach task management is very personal to you, and there's lots of different systems out there that you can try, but it's got to work for you, otherwise it won't be successful. It's got to fit with your mental models, otherwise it won't be successful.
Yeah, there's a bit of trial and error to this, isn't it? It's figuring out what's going to work, what isn't, and sometimes you can lose motivation if you're feeling like, oh, I've tried that one, it hasn't worked, and you go back to your old ways. But I think you have to persevere, don't you, and find.
You do have to persevere. I think be a little bit scientific about it and say, is this actually helping me? And have something, a goal or an objective. And I think if often people go into approach trying a new task management methodology is a very ad hoc thing. I know that I did that when I was early on in my career. It was just like, inbox 0, that's the way to do it. So I'd set it up and I'd try and do that, and I'd set up all my folders and I'd go for it. But I didn't plan that properly. I didn't plan how I needed to change my own ways of working. I didn't plan in the success criteria for what am I actually tracking to see if I get the benefit from doing this.
Yeah.
So then you don't necessarily see it. So it might be working, but you don't realize it because you're still in that pain of changing your ways of working, which is difficult and takes quite a long time to bed in. So you've got to really think about giving yourself the right amount of time to test it, and also what am I trying to achieve by doing this thing.
Yeah. Because
it might be you're trying to do the wrong, you might be actually, when you think about what you're trying to achieve, you might be trying to do the wrong thing. And the other thing that I would caution against for people is, don't do these things to try and fit in more work. That's not the reason that you're doing it. You're doing it to try and find what the most valuable pieces of work are. So it's not necessarily about making you more efficient at moving between tasks. It's about the overall value of the work that you're doing over your working week, especially as a leader.
Yeah. And you also spoke in prep, which I think people will want to hear at this point, is that, sometimes shit happens and the whole day goes to pot or the whole week goes to pot.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, it's absolutely fine. You cannot plan for all emergent scenarios that are going to happen. And some of those emergent scenarios might be a positive scenario. For you as a small business owner, you get a really big new client who comes through the door and says, this is what I want to do, but I need it this week. You've got to make some decisions about how that affects your work that you've already got planned, but it's potentially a really good scenario that you want to handle. And it could be a really bad scenario. It could be an outage. In the tech world, we've done a deployment and everything has just gone completely to pot. We have to jump on that. I've got to jump on that with my team. I've got to make sure that everybody's applying themselves to the right piece of that puzzle, whilst I'm trying to work at my level to make sure that the directors of the businesses understand what's going on and people are communicating out to client and getting the messaging right, and the right people are engaged on fixing the problem. And that you just throw out what you've got planned. And sometimes for me, that's actually going into whatever the next meeting's off, of clearing my day and figuring out, well, what are the things that that I need to drop, because it might be still the number one priority on my list still needs to get done. So I've got to drop other things that are maybe my more average weekly tasks and remove them so that I can still deliver the number one priority, because that's got a hard deadline at the end of the week. And then I need to spend the rest of the week working on whatever this emergent scenario is.
Yeah. And look, I think it's probably fair to say, like, we're not sat here going that Dan's the god of all time management and has completely solved it. It's a constant process, isn't it? Depending on situations that you're in. But what I wanted to ask was, like, what's been the impact for you in your career since you've put some focus and effort into time management?
So going back to I think focusing more on the value, I think that's really the piece that I focus on with it. So nowadays, I don't spend too much time worrying about time management. I don't really think about it in those terms. It's about what value am I delivering this week, and the rest of the time. So going to your question then about what I think it's done for me, it's helped me have more impact in the teams that I'm in. I think a big part of that is thinking about what I'm planning and I want for that team and what I want them to do and how I want to support them, then helps me to carve out the time, because I know that's really important to me and it'll have a really big impact on the team. So it's definitely helped me be able to help more people at the same time, by being more strategic about it. It's made me be more strategic. It's made me pull myself up a bit out of the weeds with things. And I'm a person who likes to dive in. You know, someone comes and I've got a problem I can't figure out why. I love to jump on with an engineer and pair with them, but sometimes that's not the most effective thing. I can find another person from another team across the business and say, I know it's not your domain, but I need someone to pair with this other engineer. There's nobody else available. Can you go and do that? And I'm sure that I could help the engineer solve the problem, because I've got 20 years of software engineering experience and I'm great at debugging stuff, but I've got to keep myself in that strategic space to make sure that I'm helping support the team, and I need to remind myself of that sometimes. And I think I'm better now at reminding myself of what my purpose is. And I think that's really thinking back to keeping track of those objectives means that you're more likely to deliver on the objectives that you're committing to, rather than them being something that you realize at the end of the quarter that you said that you were going to do, and you've got a mad rush on for the last 2 weeks to get it delivered, and it's not quite as good as you wanted it to be, but maybe you've done it, to being something that's much more steady and achieved through group effort and consensus.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying it's helped the team that you've been working with, helped you help more people. How has it helped you?
It's helped me feel less overwhelmed. I think that's probably the main thing. So I think one of the symptoms of this that relates to I'm bad at time management is I'm feeling overwhelmed by the amount of things that I've got to do. I've got so many plates spinning and I'm worried that I'm going to drop one over there. And being more proactive about understanding, well, what are the most valuable things? What can I let drop? What can I give to somebody else to hold on to, to take the plates off those spinning things and just say, I'm just putting it down on the table for now. It doesn't matter. Being able to take that view, I am less stressed. And I think as a leader, a lot of leaders are stressed out by the amount of things that they have to think about and worry about. So any time where you can remove something from that list of mental load is very, very helpful.
That's huge, like the less stressing. Like,
yeah.
Guarantee you, any leaders listening to this right now, some point this week they would have been stressed. It's a super stressful job. We had Matt Asprey on the podcast before, and he spoke a bit about loneliness, but what he spoke about was sometimes in a leadership role, you're sandwiched. You can feel a bit trapped, where you've got the people above you asking for, X, Y, and Z. But then you've also got the people below that you're responsible for. And sometimes if you do get into that lonely place and you're super stressed and you've got loads of tasks to complete, you can end up in a really tough place mentally, I think, because of that.
Yeah. I've definitely felt like that in the past. I think part of it is the environment that you're in and the supportiveness of the environment. I mean, Citation is very supportive, and my managers are very supportive, and the teams that are below me are very supportive. So I always feel like everybody's sort of almost the opposite in that everybody's trying to support me. Still pressure to make decisions, and that's my role and responsibility, is to make it. They've got two options. Well, I'm not going to pass the buck. I'm going to make the decision between the two based on the information that's available to us. And so there is definitely pressure that comes with that, but not stress. And for me, I was on holiday for a week at the start of the holidays, and I came back in, and there was a lot of work to do because I've been away on holiday. But I know that my time is limited, that I'm only going to work 9 till 5:30. I'm going to take my lunch break, and therefore there's only a certain amount of stuff that I can get through, that I can catch up on. I'm going to commit half of my Monday to doing catch up, then half of the Monday to doing reactions to that catch up, half of my Tuesday to doing the remainder of the catch up, and then reacting to that. If things are urgent, they're going to propagate up faster because people will realize that I'm back. They know when I'm on holiday. They'll come back and say, "Oh, I need an answer on this more quickly. Daniel, can you help?" So just not feeling like I've got to get to everything all at the same time. And I think it's one of those things that spoils holidays for people sometimes, is that feeling of I've got so much stuff when I go back. And I don't feel like that, because I know, yes, that is the case. There's going to be lots of stuff to do, but I can put it in an order which works for me and is value-based. And therefore, I've done the best attempt that I can do to delivering the maximum value. Because that's all we can ask of anybody. It's all you can ask of yourself, is to do as well as you can to deliver the value. And you've got to think, and it also helps you think about that longer term value. So longer term value comes from me being well rested. So if I have a good holiday and I'm relaxed, when I come back in, I'm feeling refreshed. I'm not worried about the amount of work that I've got to do. That's going to make me think clearer. It's going to make me make better decisions. If you're stressed and worried about it, you're going to make worse decisions. You're going to be rushed. You're going to be jumping from meeting to meeting to meeting. You're going to be trying to catch up with everybody all at once. And sometimes in those weeks, I've got a weekly one-to-one with one of my leaders, and sometimes I'll say, "Can we move this to tomorrow afternoon? If there's anything urgent, give me a call." We're both trying to catch up because we're both back from holiday, and we understand that we sometimes need to move a regular meeting. And as long as you've got an open conversation about it, I know there's some managers who'll be never move a one-to-one because it's almost sacrosanct. And I think if you've got an open enough relationship with your team, and they can understand we've all got to make value-based decisions about what we need to approach, as long as I'm open to say, "Oh, if we need it in there, then let's still go with it, but let's just move it by a day, just to make everybody's life easier and less stressful."
As long as it happens. That's the thing, isn't it? People talk about if you move it, don't ever move it. But that's mostly because people move in, it doesn't really happen again. It all gets forgotten about. So I think as long as it happens, that's fine. It's really interesting what you're saying about the holiday thing, being well rested. And obviously it fits back to the value stuff. For me, getting better at this starts with a mindset shift. I can imagine there's people who've been on holiday this summer, super stressed out. All they think about is work. They're not present with their family. And we can get really deep on this, but life is too short for you to be worrying about that stuff and missing out on those moments with your family because you're stressed about work.
Yep.
But guess what? Nothing's going to change unless you make a decision to change it. You can't just expect a new job to come along and it changes it all. Sometimes that happens fine, but you've got to be the one who makes a change, I think, with that. Okay, we come to the final question, and that is, if someone's listening to this and they've just stepped into their first leadership position, what would be the first piece of advice you give them?
I think the advice that I would give would be to go slow, but not too slow. I think a lot of people, when they're taking on leadership roles, they rush in. So they go in one of two modes. And I've done both of these things. So they either dive straight in and try and fix all the problems all at the same time. They can see that everything, they can see there's lots of things that are broken. Maybe your CI/CD is broken. Maybe your engineering teams aren't working in a very agile way, or any of these things that we see as leaders. And we think, okay, I can change all of those things. I can get that moving. And they just they try and bite off too much stuff all at the same time. And it's like a really whiplash change. The other way that can happen is they go in and they think, I'm going to spend some time analyzing and evaluating what's going on. And they spend 3 months evaluating it. And by that time, they've lost the momentum almost of them being a new leader and being able to do some experimentation, to being able to have a positive impact. And people have already made their impression of, they're not really going to change anything. It's just more of the same. We're not really getting anywhere. And you lose that little bit of appetite for change. So it's spend an appropriate time thinking about and looking at where the problems are and then approach that in an agile way. Think about, well, what I'm going to do one of these things at a time, and I'm going to measure the improvement and be open with that, with the team, with the management team as well that you're reporting into, to say, this is what we're trying and this is how we're measuring what we're trying. So maybe that's just as simple as, the team are great. They're getting tasks and blocks. They're doing a lot of stuff. Everything's working quite nicely, but they're not spending enough time thinking about experimenting on new ideas. So we're going to put in half a day for each engineer every week to spend some time on blue sky thinking, and that's what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to measure the impact that has. Is this going to slow us down? Is it going to speed us up? Longer term research has shown that would speed up most engineering teams, having that change of thought onto a slightly separate topic. But it's applying that agile approach of making small changes and measuring the outcome for what you've changed, whether that's a qualitative or a quantitative measure, and then just feeding back and reflecting on it and bringing that information to everybody who's involved.
Nice. Thank you. Cool. Let's go quick fire?
Yep.
Let's do it. Right, Dan, this is the part we do quick fire questions. So we ask everybody who comes on the pod the same question. So first thing that pops to mind, just mention it. Best advice ever received?
Best advice I'd ever received is, it's a business piece, but I think you can apply it to other things. It's really easy to say. It's spend time working on your business, not in your business. And I think it's the same for a leader. Spend time working on your team, not in your team.
Excellent. AI, for or against?
For.
One piece of tech you couldn't live without?
That's interesting. I don't think there's any piece of tech that I couldn't live without.
Wow. Okay. One book or audio book you would recommend to somebody?
At the moment, I'm reading a book called Range, How Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. It's by David Epstein. It's really very interesting. Lots of research on how generalists and specialists work together, and different people who are generalists or specialists that you wouldn't necessarily think of in those terms.
Nice. If you weren't in tech, what would you be doing?
Probably something that's like with schools or kids. I've got a child and I love working with kids, so probably something like that.
Nice. Morning routine?
Yeah, lazy usually. If I can get away with it, often you can't. School runs and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
How late sleeping in?
Oh no, I mean, if I had my own way, probably 10 o'clock. But my wife's an early riser, so she wouldn't let me get away with it.
Same. 100% same. What's one thing you wish you would have done sooner as a leader?
Think about what I wanted to do and what direction I wanted to take with my career.
Nice. Favorite food?
Curry, generally.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. What takes up most of your time?
It's an interesting question given the context of what we've been talking about, because it's suggesting that something's taking my time and I'm not that I'm investing and giving my time.
Yeah. No,
you always want to say meetings. it's the default answer.
Yeah. It's always meetings. Okay. And if your team had to describe you in no more than 3 words, what would they say?
I think that they would say that I'm a supportive manager. I'm quite engaging. Probably that I'm a bit random's not quite the right word, but sometimes I'll ask questions that initially seem quite strange. I'll just go into a conversation and say, "Oh, how does X work?" Like just completely without giving very much context, and then they'll have to ask me. They'll have to just be, "Wow, why do you want to know that?" There's a lot of context around that maybe would be useful for you.
Oh, brilliant! Okay, great.
All right, bro.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks,
really
Adam. It's been fantastic.